This is Kelly.
And this is Amy.
And you're listening to Diary of a Death Investigator. Amy's laughing at me because we've been talking about bad juju. And I said I should have saged my room before we started the podcast.
Well, it's more than just that. First, you said take the Bible and rub it on your walls to cleanse your home. And then I said, well, I do actually have like sage bundles to sage my own house, because I used to joke how I would bring the ghosts home with me. Or don't they have shows like that? What was that show I used to tell Mom that I really liked? It was like the cat guy, where the cat showed up to the guy's doorstep and he would like prevent bad things from happening to people, because he'd get like the newspaper of bad things that were going to happen.
Oh, yeah. I don't remember what it's called, but I know what you're talking about. Like, that's old.
I know. Well,
yeah. The newspaper. It was a good one.
So I feel like I have to occasionally sage to like still get those, let them pass on and be on their way where they should be and not in my house.
Because you're so special, they want to follow you home.
You know, we've had conversations before about the lingering and how I think sometimes, I very much believe that sometimes there's some communication that might happen there. So sorry they don't want to communicate with you, okay?
They don't want to communicate with me because I'm going to rub the Bible on the walls.
Yeah, they're going to be sitting there and being like, you're not doing it the right way. So...
yeah. No, they want me to.
I'll send you some
They want
sage.
me to draw the crosses. They want me to draw the crosses in the corner.
Maybe they do. You know what? That guy is probably still hanging around my house too. So I don't know.
So on a more serious note, I had a passing of someone this week. It was on my husband's side of the family, and it was a lot. And I'm only saying this because I want to recognize all those people who go out to scenes like Amy, like you did, anybody, police officers, the fire department, transport. When people have passed and you have family members inside the house, I know you say it all the time, but you just have tried to be so careful and respectful. And I got to be a part of it for the first time. And so it was a lot. And I just have a new appreciation for everybody who goes out on those scenes. So thank you to all the people who work out in that field and have to deal with that every day. Like it's horrible. The fact that I had to deal with it once is bad enough. And I know family is different, but having to internalize that like every day, I physically felt ill for the rest of the day. You know, like, yes, because of what happened, but also because you're so emotionally charged for so long. So,
well, it is nice to feel appreciated too, because I don't know how many times I've told you, you don't always get that from people, which is totally fine. Because like you said, you know, you feel emotionally charged from that. And so multiple times, you know, I was that person that people would blame for the loss of someone, which was fine. And there were other times where, you know, it'd be completely unexpected and people wanted me to pray with them, which was absolutely fine. And just sometimes I was very overcome with emotions, how gracefully people would take on that loss. And they would just say, we'll meet them again someday. And gosh, like, I feel like I would leave almost more emotional than I would be coming in to see that family. So yeah, I think sometimes you can get caught up in that because you do see that so many times in one day, but you also have to remember to be very open to the fact that each individual person and family is their own situation and it's a different family member or loved one for everybody. So yeah, it's heavy, very heavy. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So thank you. This week, we're on episode 16, and we finally hit our treat, which is the Green River Killer.
Kelly's been so ready for this. So I hope that we do not disappoint you on this. What I told Kelly is, yes, this has been covered by other people, big podcasters, but what is different is because I can give it to you from a different perspective from someone who has worked crime scenes that are similar to this. So I hope that I can give you a special insight. So I think today Kelly's going to be the one that's going to be asking questions.
But I also think, Amy, we don't talk about it enough. So Amy has a master's in forensics. For those of you
I have
that
3
don't
degrees.
know. Yeah. Well, tell everybody
I
what your
spent 8
degrees
years
are.
in school. So I had to dual degree in undergrad. So that was criminal justice and forensic science. And then I started a minor in biology. And then I was like, no, I just want to graduate. So I ended up graduating with over 150 hours. And then
150 hours in biology?
150 hours total in undergrad.
Oh, okay.
So some of that was biology as well. And then I did a year of law school. I didn't finish law school, but that's another 20 hours of just classes. And then I went back and got my master's, which is an additional 30 hours. So that's 8 years of school. Yes. And I focused primarily on medical legal death investigations So when I was in school, it was kind of a unique situation because I was already working as an investigator and I had amazing professors that luckily I knew very well, and they were willing to work with me because they knew I could not always get up to the school because I was working 24-hour and 32-hour shifts. And sometimes I would try to come up to school and I'd literally be sitting in class and my phone would go off and I'd walk out of class and I'd be like, I've been here 5 minutes. I gotta go. And they would understand. I'd have to leave class to go to a scene. So like one of my classes for a semester was I literally wrote like a curriculum for a medical legal death investigation, like as if I were making it for an investigator that was training to become a medical legal death investigator for medical examiner's office. So I made this whole binder. I made a whole semester's worth of curriculum as far as like tests and like PowerPoints. And I remember actually sitting at your house, like doing some of these.
Oh, I remember that. That was
book I had that was like very graphic pictures of like homicide scenes and stuff. So that was actually one of my, and they called it like an independent study course, but they counted it towards, so I was very lucky that I had, but actually some of my doctors, I had another professor that allowed me to do like case studies with another one of my doctors, a pathologist at the office. And so I could do like some of these cases that they were like studying in class. And then I could like kind of cross study it with other cases that I was currently working in the office. And then I could discuss it with one of the doctors and we would just sit there and discuss it. And I learned so much because it was literally like hands-on training while I was making curriculum and doing all these things while actually doing the job in real life. So,
okay. So wait, let's go back to the day that you were at my house and you had the giant book. Didn't we go to Tahoe or something? And you had to come back because...
Yeah, tuberculosis exposure.
Yeah, you found out you had been exposed.
I was not happy.
But you found out because how did you come about being exposed to that?
So once a year, you're supposed to get tested for it anyways, which if people aren't familiar with TB, which technically tuberculosis should technically be extinct, like, except for like in a lab. And so tuberculosis, it's going to be in the lungs. And when we open up the body cavity, and particularly the ribs, they sometimes use a saw to open up the rib cage. And so what that can do essentially is puncture the lungs. And so what that can do is actually send those particles of this tuberculosis into the air. And they still require us to wear these like specific masks that have these filters on them.
Like the N95s?
Yes, but like the ones that were...
Oh, like the
Darth
ones
Vader
in Breaking
style.
Bad? Like the Breaking Bad ones?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So like, not only are you required to wear those masks, and you have to have like your own special one that only you can wear, which this is all changed now. That's besides the point. But they knew when this person came in that this was a thing. So like I was in a whole different office in the lab at the time with the door shut and I still had my mask on. And I don't even think they used the saw on this guy. They also have like, they're like hedge trimmers and they use that to actually cut the ribs, it's safer and you can get a little more leverage. I know it sounds horrible, but it's actually safer because you're not exposed to those air particles.
And you got to have a lot of muscle.
Well, it's actually more leverage with like the hedge trimmers than it would be on the saw, because the saw isn't necessarily going to be as stable for someone who maybe isn't as comfortable with it. So for like the females that were like the Deaners, they actually would prefer those. So yeah, they require us to get tested at least once a year. And so what they do for tuberculosis testing is they take this needle and they do on the inside part of your like forearm. And they stick this little needle right under your skin and it should just bubble up. And it almost looks like a bug bite. And then what they do is, I think it's 48 hours, between 48 hours and 72 hours, you're supposed to come back to the same clinic and they're supposed to check it. Like it should go away. But if you like miss that time span, like you have to get it redone. And so, yeah, like I think one year I had it done like 3 or 4 times. I'm like, this is stupid. Like if I didn't have it before, I probably do now. And especially like the one time I got tested, this girl kept saying she like didn't do it right. And I'm like, I will do it myself. Like just give me the needle. It literally just goes right underneath the surface of your skin. So of course now it's a lot different. And it didn't even make sense at the time because literally our air duct system at our facility filtered all the air for the entire office, not only for the morgue, but also continued through to the office up front. So I'm like, so if I have to get checked, then you also have to get checked up front in these offices because you're breathing all the same air, right? And you're not wearing a mask. So it made no sense to me and it ticked me off because this lady was especially snarky to me all the time.
Well, I didn't mean to open a can of worms. I just remember like we had to leave anyway, going back to now the Green River Killer. The reason that
you changed that so far. It's better now though, because it's a different air duct system, 2 different air duct systems. Anyways.
The reason that we picked the Green River Killer is actually because one of the classes that you took in school was a profiling class.
Yes.
And you said, let's do the Green River Killer. And I was like, oh, I've never heard of him. And the reason that I got excited about it is because, let me Wikipedia him. But basically, that's my source. No, I think the biggest thing was, so he started killing back in, it was 1982 to 1998. It was confirmed. And then possibly as recent as 2001.
Well, not his killings. That's when they're like kind of finding like the DNA kind of thing.
Okay. So he was initially convicted of 48 separate murders committed between the early 1980s and late 1990s. And then as part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him, and this is the best part, I mean, not the best part, but this is why I was most excited. Well, second most. I'll tell you what the first one was in a second.
Okay.
Making him the second most prolific serial killer in the United States history, according to confirmed murders. So I had never heard of him before. Now, Netflix, we see all these documentaries and we're like, oh, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, which is the first reason I was most excited about this because Ted Bundy helped catch him, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if he was like working with, I think it was he was working with the detective that was on the case or something. And maybe you can like, I don't know, tell us a little bit about that. But I thought that was, I think you said like it takes a killer to catch a killer or something. I thought that was crazy because they didn't catch him until what, like 2001?
Yeah. So it's literally like 20 years after. So it was Detective Reichert was the one who renewed the investigations because that's really when you start seeing DNA kind of like taking off. That's when they're like, oh, we have this DNA stuff and it actually works for convictions. Like, let's use more of this. So really that's kind of what renewed the interest on him. So they had a whole task force for these cases, which I have to say too, this profiling class I took, my professor was a profiler for the FBI.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But kind of the sad thing is like profiling isn't really like a thing anymore. So, all these students now are like, I want to be a profiler for like the FBI. I'm like, Yeah, it's sad. It's not really like a thing anymore.
Why?
I mean, they basically like have all of these. I mean, they have people that work for the FBI or whatever, and they're like, okay, well, we've interviewed all these people. We know what to look for. It's not like,
Because they
I
say
don't know.
serial killers don't change. Like, they're probably all the same if they're same patterns that you're going to see throughout history. So now we just understand them a little bit better. And with the internet, we can look them up. Is that why?
It's hard to say. I really don't know for certain.
Or we can just use the murderers that are in jail, like Ted Bundy, and utilize him to catch them.
That is literally a lot of what their research is based on, is like people that have been interviewed in jails. And that's a lot of like where like the FBI started with like profiling to begin with. They like interviewed all of these like sex offenders, and actually like I have this really cool professor. Like I absolutely love her. Like I took her in undergrad, and I took another class with her in my graduate school, and she was criminal justice. Like she's written a couple of books about like basically, I mean, profiling people based upon not just their like mentality, but also there used to be this chart of how people looked. And it was like, you could guess that they were going to have this criminal mentality based upon like their structure of their head. So if they had this profound eyebrow and like more of a boxy square head, it was like, I forget what exactly they called it, but like she did this whole study about, and like we studied this in undergrad too. And gosh, it's been so long now. But like they had this whole study about it, and they would literally arrest people based on they had this look about them. And
I'm not sure that's legal.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny. It's like I look at a lot of these like MMA boxers and stuff. I'm like, they kind of have that look. Like they just kind of look like these people that want to fight all the time. I'm like, that makes sense. They're angry. Like, I don't know. But, you know, she like, that's what like the undergrad class is. And then the graduate level class is talking about like how she then studies. And when she was in grad school, she went in and studied like all of these people that were like sexual offenders. And she would ask them like all of these uncomfortable questions. And like, she did not care. I mean, she wrote books about them and basically like, why do you do what you do? And it's just like, what kind of gratification do you get out of this? And it's basically just finding the trends and patterns that you find within all of these men. So it's like what their race is, what their age group is, like their marital status. What has your past been like with your partners? What kind of education do you have? It's like all these things. It's like, what is your background like with your family? It's all these things that they can just pull these similarities. And so that's where they get these profiles from. And so that's kind of where I think they were like, Ted Bundy, it's like, okay, he was also this serial killer that, he got away with this for what, how long? And also, you know, I've told you how many times, like Ted Bundy, I think he thought he was like really smart. And so I think he liked being kind of in that limelight of like, he liked feeling like he needed to be needed.
But he also was smart. I mean, I feel like he was smart.
Yes, but I mean, he got caught. So.
Well, I mean, I feel like he was smart in a lot of ways, but dumb in a lot of ways. Because I think maybe, I don't want to say the generation was dumb. That's not what I'm saying. I think in the 70s,
it's knowing how to manipulate your population.
Yeah, but I also think people maybe were a little bit more free, because I think that's when maybe he started. I don't know timelines, but you know, people were a little bit more like free, like, oh yeah, free spirited.
He's smart in the fact that I think a lot of these serial killers, they do a couple of these murders and they sit back and they watch and see the reaction and they see what happens. And then they're like, nothing's happened, so I can get away with this. And then they continue to do it. Or maybe they might change their pattern a little bit. So in that sense, they can be smart, right? It's getting, I just call it like master manipulation. So I don't know, like you said, I forget which episode you talked about, like where you live at, like, you know, that there were a couple serial killers, right? Well, what kind of police force did they have there in that time? What, 2 sheriffs maybe?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But I also think like again, I think it was the time frame because I think it was in the 70s. I think it was like early 70s is when one of them was Edmund Kemper. And then the other one was a guy who I think his name's like Herbert Miller or Herbert something. So yeah, they were both around the same. At one point, they thought they were the same person. The police did. So,
well, if they're similar in profiles and they're doing the same things, which I think that in a way might be smart. Like, and especially this was all happening before DNA, right? So if you could do these things without DNA, and like forensics wasn't even a thing either. I mean, they could do some things like ballistics and I think fingerprinting, but even then, it's not like you have a data system that you can like run this stuff through. So, excuse me, it's not like there's like a national database where you have like internet access where you're able to like access a whole nationwide or even worldwide database where you can hit a match through that and see what other crimes that they were affiliated with. It's nothing near what it is today. So really like the internet was like the first thing that allowed for like, I would probably say for the Green River killer, 2001, look what happened around that time. You have forensics and then, well, like the internet.
The internet.
Yeah. So a lot happened during that time. And I mean, we'll talk about it here in a little bit, but we're still seeing bodies being found. So
the Green River is where?
In Washington state. So it's going to be like Tacoma, city limits of Seattle.
And so his first murder that we know of ish was around like 1982, right? Like early 1980s.
It was August 15th, 82. This man, I believe he was on a raft on his way. I think he was going south down the river.
Oh, like a kayak or something.
Yeah, I think this was like a regular thing for him. I don't know if he fished. I don't really know what his agenda was, but I know that...
Agenda? You make it sound like he's up to no good.
Well, I mean, if you're not fishing, what else are you doing? I mean, of course, I don't know what Seattle was like during this time, but...
Maybe he was just getting some fresh air, Amy.
Maybe. I don't know. I think everyone's a suspect until proven otherwise. Our main man here, he is going down his raft. He sees some other guys in a pickup truck. He sees them looking at something in the river. Then he sees them leave. Then he comes up to what they have been looking at in the water, which... I do not understand why people are so dense. I literally, if I hear one more person say in an interview that they thought it was a mannequin, Kelly, tell me, how many times you have seen a mannequin or thought you've seen a mannequin on the side of the road? Because I never have thought I think that's a mannequin on the side of a road. No, never. Who has a spare mannequin?
No, I don't have a spare mannequin. Also, I always just expect there to be some body parts in the bags you see on the side of the road. Like,
who would just have a mannequin in the river or on the side of a road, like in a ditch? Like, I don't need this anymore. I'll just toss it here. I don't know how many podcasts like, yeah, they just thought he looked like a mannequin.
Amy didn't sage your house today.
No, I didn't. That's my whole other thing about these people.
That's why you're listening to our podcast, right?
Yes, it's not the people that find the bodies. It's the people that are retelling the stories, okay? Anyways.
So did the dude think it was a mannequin or did he think it was a body? We don't know.
The retelling of this says mannequin. Anyways, so...
But we're going to say no.
No. So he comes up to it and he's trying to basically dislodge the person because he doesn't really know exactly what it is at the time. But then once he...
So are they stuck like in the rocks or something?
There's a lot of brush, like limbs and stuff, because it's like up around like the bank of the river. And once he finally like dislodges the body, he sees like the eyes of a woman, and she's a young Black woman, and she's just floating on the surface. And so I guess there's like rocky kind of areas around there too. I think he ends up falling into the river, and then he ends up getting her like up onto the rocks there, and he gets a hold of the cops. Well, when the cops get there, the cops actually find like 2 other bodies. So there's 3 bodies in the river that day. So this is like how it all starts.
And they're all floating.
Yes. So if you listen to our episode
from last week, Body in the Lake.
Yes. we know what happens when bodies are floating, which also though a river is a little bit different, right? It's not a stagnant body of water. So this river does have a current. So if it does come up to something, it could also catch, which would also cause it to float too. And then if it's August there, I'm not really familiar with Seattle weather. Do you know what Washington's?
I mean, I think it's hot-ish.
So, I mean, if it's August there, it's probably going to be 80s. So probably going to be in a decomposing state, and being in the water also going to further that decomposition process along as well. And I know that it did state that she was nude. And so basically no form of identification on her. And then being in the water, of course, at that time, they're not worried about DNA, right? Because it's early 80s. They're like, we don't know what that is.
So when the water is going like that and moving, wouldn't that also like make them decompose faster? Because there's different elements, right? Like then you're hitting up against rocks, which I'm just thinking.
Yes, I've pulled bodies out of rivers before, and it does make the bodies appear that they do have more trauma to them, but you can also tell what appears to be postmortem and antemortem. So postmortem is obviously after death and antemortem's before death. And so what the difference is, you can just tell with postmortem trauma is there's just not going to be any basically blood to those like vessels. It's just going to be a different discoloration, or it's going to appear like more like yellow. It's not going to have like that reddish pink tint where you would see like a bleeding effect, like antemortem. So I've seen cases before where someone had stabbed a body. Gosh, it was like 60, 70 times or more. I don't even know if they were able to count how many times this person was stabbed, but they stabbed her to death, and then they came back and stabbed her more later. And you could definitely distinguish which stab marks were postmortem versus antemortem because the colors of the trauma were different. So,
and before I forget, so last week we talked about that waxy film that goes.
Yes.
Do we have an actual word for that now?
We do. And it like haunted me in my dreams all week because, of course, I didn't look it up right after. So it's called adiposia. Or adiposer, if you want to be real American about it. A lot of these words, you got to think about where they basically originated from. So like Latin or French. So this is from a guy, Sir Thomas Browne from 1658. So it's a very, very old word. And so basically they call this like graveyard wax. You just see this, or corpse wax. You just see this basically from like just body fat that accumulates on the tissue as the body goes through its decomposition phase, right? So as this happens, it's this, well, this is the scientific term. It's the anaerobic bacterial hydrolysis of fat. So basically the bacteria is eating away at your body, and then the fat just basically starts seeping through, and then it kind of like hardens.
Is it something that you could scrape off?
I wouldn't say that it's like really hard. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be, how do I want to describe
like a lotion?
this?
Does it feel like a lotion on someone's?
No.
Oh.
No, it's not like that. I want to say it's almost like it makes the skin like slippery texture.
Okay.
It's almost think like a fish or something. I don't.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like a slimy kind of feeling. If you've ever, okay, this is going to sound weird, but like a stingray skin, that's kind of how I would best describe it. They're kind of like that slimy texture, but it's smooth. It just is what surfaces. And then if it's on a body that's been in the water for a very long time, it might discolor the skin texture as well.
So, okay. So then we had 3 bodies in the river the first time. And then were they all African-American women?
No, I don't think he necessarily had a proclivity for a certain race, as we'll see. I think that it was just anyone that basically became an easy target for him as far as what they described as prostitutes. What they did find out with these first 3 women were that they all knew each other.
Oh.
Yes. If you've listened to other documentaries or whatever, typically what they say is when they talk to prostitutes, a lot of times they don't necessarily want to talk to cops or whatever because they don't want to get in trouble or anything. But They didn't know like who the suspect was. They knew that these women knew each other. And I think a lot of times with these women, they don't really know like their history or their background. I think a lot of times it's hard to track down any identification for them. So this particular area that they knew that he was, or him, I should just say, really where they started finding these bodies at, it was in a particular area that they noticed they started seeing all these bodies over the years. So it's basically that you would see a lot of these bodies popping up between 82 and 84 that they found the majority of these bodies. And they were all asphyxiation. So I'm not sure if the first one was like manual asphyxiation, where it was like, strangulation by like hands. But I think there was another woman that was found that I think she had been strangled with like her pants.
Oh, I did hear that. Yeah, I've heard that.
Which, I mean, it's going to have basically the same effect because he would have had to pull the legs of the pants taut to strangle her. But that is really hard to do, to strangle someone. I mean, it's not like someone blacks out immediately. Like you have to hold them for a long period of time, which we've talked about before, like your jugular and carotid arteries, right? In your neck, how one takes oxygen up and the other one basically is taking the blood back down to the heart. And so anytime you release from the neck, it's allowing some of that, the red blood cells, that's the oxygenated red blood cells, to go up to the brain. So what you're seeing then is you might see more of those, what we call petechiae. So the pinpricking of the eyes and in the face. And you might even see it below the neck too, like in the chest area. But that's what you see a lot in strangulation cases or any type of asphyxiation. So that can be like drowning as well. Wherever there's a lack of oxygen or like a gasping for breath, choking. So you're going to get that breath of oxygen and then it's going to be cut off. And so like the vessels are going to pop. So you'll see that a lot. Like what we do is typically when we take pictures, we'll pull back the eyelids and we'll take pictures of the eyelids because that's where you see it really well, of the burst blood vessels in the eye. So the petechia there. And so
Amy just took her glasses off to show me and move her eyelids around.
Yeah, I know. I forget that Kelly's my only audience, my audience of one for my visual effects here.
One day we'll get there. One day we'll get there. Not today.
Right. Well, and a lot of times you'll see discoloration of the body too. So people will turn like a purple. Sometimes you might see the protruding of the tongue and maybe the eyes might bulge as well. But they also have, it's called tardo. Tardo can also be like kind of the vessels where you see that discoloration of the vessels. Typically that's going to be also below,
like above the, like around the breastplate area.
Well, like chest. You'll see that a lot in like heart attacks. They're called tardo spots. Here again, they're hemorrhaging. And so it's going to be a secondary rupture. So what you would call degeneration of vessels. And so here again, it's the increasing pressure of the strangulation. So it is petechia. Here again, they're going to be more purple and pronounced. So a lot of times when you see like very massive like heart attacks, you'll see a lot of that like in the chest. So when people have big heart attacks, what they call like widowmakers, and someone dies from it, obviously you'll see they're purple literally from their chest up. And then you'll see all those tardo spots
across their chest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even up in their face. I mean, they're purple, like violet. So that's, I think, basically all of his victims, I want to say, were all strangulation, asphyxiation. I'll say asphyxiation because I don't want to make an assumption on facts that I don't know all the case, because I know a lot of them later on were skeletal remains.
So I read somewhere that he didn't kill them at the river though, right? Like he killed them in his home or in his truck. Maybe the truck was at the river, but he didn't kill them at the river.
Everything that I am familiar with, yeah, it was like either at his house or in his truck. And actually, you know, what was crazy was when he was actually interviewed later, when they were asking him like about particular victims, because they were asking like, well, why these victims? And he was like, which is a typical answer from someone like this. He said that he did not respect prostitutes and he knew he could get what he wanted from them without paying them. And so he would get his service from them and then would just kill them afterwards.
Oh, wait, he still got like serviced?
Yes.
I was just thinking he picked him up and then like couldn't even
No.
be bothered with it. Because he was married like 3 times.
I didn't know he was married 3 times. I know that when they interviewed him, they were saying like he had really weird like proclivities to things.
What does that mean?
He liked certain things from women sexually that I know that were he wanted to go to places and have like, so the women that he was engaged to, he would take them to the places where these bodies were found or where he dumped the bodies and wanted to do stuff there. And what they found out was that he would dump these women in clusters so that he could go drive by and visit them.
Which is what Ted Bundy did.
Right.
He went back and visited.
Well, one thing that was especially odd of this guy, he took, which is trophies, right? He would take jewelry and he would leave it in the bathroom of his work. And yes, he would leave it in the bathroom of his work. And when no one would claim the jewelry, whoever it was, they would tell, why don't you keep it? And he like got pleasure in seeing the women wearing that jewelry around his office.
Oh, that's not cool.
So no, the profilers, they said that, the reason why he chose these women was, quote unquote, he thought they were garbage. He literally treated them like garbage because where he was like dumping them, like in these particular locations, it was like literally like a garbage dump, like road and like abandoned roads, like in those places where there was access to these rivers. So like he treated them like garbage because he thought they were garbage.
But yet he took their stuff. So
yeah, but like he couldn't identify them particularly is what he said when he was like caught. But they said, oddly enough, he could give very specific details about every car he ever owned and like every home he ever lived in because
that was important to him.
Yes, because he valued those things. He had value in those. And so they said they thought that was weird.
So we know about the ones that he killed. Well, because he admitted to like close to 90.
Yeah. I mean, there's different sites say different things. Some say like between 75 and 80 and some say like 90. So it goes back and forth. I mean, and he's changed locations where he started dumping. So that's one thing that can be argued. It's like, well, maybe he was like actually capable of doing all these. And especially given the amount of time that he was actually out there doing those things too.
Did they only catch? Well, no, because you just said, so it wasn't just the Green River. It was outside of the Green River also?
Yeah. So he eventually, because what happened was he actually got caught in his vehicle with a prostitute. So he got in trouble for that. And then he got, I think that's when, like not very long after that, they found her dead. And so they called him in for questioning. And this was like 84. And in 84, they did a polygraph on him, which he, of course, said, he was innocent. And they ended up letting him go, which magically they stopped seeing so many dumpings. And then I believe that it was then off like Interstate 90. So like 40 miles away, they started seeing like bones over there. And then there was like SeaTac Airport in Star Lake. So they started seeing more stuff over there. So it's like Mountain View Cemetery in North Bend. So they started seeing, so he was kind of changing because he was like, oh crap, like I kind of got caught, like I need to change like locations.
Yeah. So at what point did Ted Bundy get involved?
Ooh, I'm not sure, actually. I thought that's a question that you would know. I feel like it was 87 that he got because I think it was Capel. He was the guy that actually worked on the Bundy case. He was the FBI guy that worked on the case. And so I believe that he was the one that worked on Bundy and was like, hey, like, why don't we get him involved on this? And so I believe it was at the beginning of 87. And then I think that's when they started kind of finding those bodies over in that area. So I think that's around that time. It's 87.
I thought he reached out to that guy and was like, hey, don't tell anybody, but I can help you catch the killer.
I feel like that's what Ted Bundy would want people to know.
Yeah, and it could be that he just told him, like, it may not have been that he, like, necessarily helped catch him, just that, I mean, he did, right? I think he said, like, hey, you got to look for these patterns. Like, he's going to be revisiting the scenes. He's going to be doing this.
Because I believe that they actually, if I remember this right, because I specifically remember these slides from class, which was a decade ago. Okay, at least. What the FBI was doing, they noticed these certain locations because they were in clusters where they were being marked at. And yes, like Bundy was saying, okay, he is going to be visiting these places. And so they were setting up these like
surveillance
markers. Yeah. And so I want to say, unless I'm getting this confused with another case, that they heard a body being dumped into the water. So I want to say he was pulled over and being asked what he was doing there.
Possibly, because you hear about that all the time. Just like that recent killer in New Jersey that got caught. I think it was New Jersey that everybody was talking about. And he had been dumping bodies in the river. Did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because why else would you be there?
But wait, that was the best part. Like at one point he's like, oh, I'm like taking junk out of the river or I'm dumping these barrels in the river or something, right? And it's like,
barrels, it's like, oh, good.
Red flag. Just check the barrel. Like of all, clearly these guys have never watched any scary movie because that would be the first thing I'd be like, hey, let me check your barrel real fast. How heavy is it? Can I lift it? What's in there?
Yeah, those barrels alone are so heavy. Like, just like those barrels by themselves, but like, and they're just awkward shaped. And he was not a very big guy. So, like, the thing is, it's like... to have a body in there on top of that.
Yeah.
And like, it's loud too. It's like, I don't know. It's dumb.
I do want to say though, I haven't read the book, but there is a book called The River Man, which is based on the true story of Ted Bundy assisting investigators trying to identify and catch the
Is that the one that's like says, read between the spines?
I don't know. I just know that it was from the Robert Capel guy or whatever. So.
Okay. Well, let me tell you, my friend that actually like the one that worked for the FBI, that she went to the same school as me, and she said she got to attend a full day presentation from one of the detectives on the case a couple years ago. This one is called, she said, this is a really good book. It's called Defending Gary, and it's called Unraveling the Mind of the Green River Killer, and it's by Mark Prothero with Carlton Smith.
Oh, I think I've seen that one. Okay, and that actually brings up a really good point. We didn't tell you what his name was. The Green River Killer, his name is Gary Leon Ridgway. So he was born he was born February 18th, 1949. So he's still alive.
Yeah, he is. It's Ridgway.
Oh, sorry, Ridgway.
Yeah, he has little peach fuzz on his head. So
yeah, he's 74 years old now.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you said that you did it, at this point, he's already in jail. He's like, I'm not ever getting out. So he can say whatever he wants. And maybe that's part of it. The fact that they're still finding bodies.
Yes. Yeah. That's something that's also really interesting too, is like, you know, I've talked to you before about cases, which I need to tell like the difference. There's a difference between homicides and serial killers, right? So serial killers is when there's like this cooling off period between killings. So like when you have multiple deaths or multiple murders by the same person, or like you still have multiple people dead, but there's like this cooling off period. But like a mass murder or mass homicide is like multiple people like are all getting killed at like one time. So when we have something like this, I would say like in a medical examiner setting, a lot of times, and it depends on how many people are being killed. It can be very overwhelming for a doctor. And like we've said earlier, it can be very emotionally draining, right? Like on someone having to deal with this. But at the same time, if this doctor is having to go to court to testify on this, like, you want this same doctor to have all these same cases because one, they're going to know what to look for while doing this autopsy. Two, you're not going to want multiple doctors out for multiple court dates, like so many times like a year, because then like you're going to be short a doctor all the time or multiple doctors. So you can get backlogged really easy. But like that is very stressful for a doctor having to work cases like this in itself. So something that I came across, which I didn't actually get to read the publication, but there are publications about how they are continuing to find decomposing skeletal remains from the Green River murder investigation. So something that I think a lot of people didn't think about is because he did spread out his dropping sites. There's 26 separate scenes. And there are actually pictures online from like them even looking like in his backyard, which is like a whole different, that's a whole different mess. But you are getting a lot of people involved at this point when you're getting that many different scenes. And I know that he also did try to keep all of his cases just in King County.
Why is that?
He was just saying something about how the prosecution keeping the case in King County. Who knows? I don't know. Which I do think is interesting because I would think that would just heighten the
awareness of what he's doing.
Yes. And like the chances of him being caught.
So he was just being cocky and he's like, oh, I'll keep him on here. No one's going to catch me. Because to be fair, nobody caught him for a really long time.
Right. And 26 different scenes. So for them to still be finding bones. So think of how many different agents. So sheriff's deputies, cops, different witnesses, now looking back over this, crime scene investigators and pathologists. So that means your medical examiners, because King County is I believe it's a medical examiner, which it may have changed. And I don't know if in the past it's been coroner. So coroners or medical examiners. So think of how many doctors have worked on this case over time. So how many investigators have worked on this? Detectives. There are so many people involved with this, and it's been since 82. So how many years is that?
A lot.
40?
But also we know what it's like when there's too many hands in the cookie jar, right? And then...
Yes. So a lot of differences of opinions, right? Because all these people, as time has gone on, people are trained differently, differences of opinions. So...
New technology.
I mean, yes, technology, big time. So a lot of forensic stuff has probably aided a lot in this investigation. But oh my gosh, just doing like finding bones and digging bones, that is a whole like at least a week. Because now what they do for what we call like archaeological digs, I've done one of these before. It is not fun when it is hot. It is miserable. And the one that we did was like a week long. And you have to do like layer by layer of soil. And like the first thing that they do is like, you have to send the drones up into there and take pictures with the drones. And like, not just anyone can do this with the drones. Like you have to have a special license to do this because it's in airspace. And then you have to do all your measurements. And from each special measurement, you have to say like this bone was found from like this certain radius from this point and at like this layer of dirt, like, and you have to sift through each layer of dirt to make sure you're not missing anything. I mean, it is so tedious. I mean, absolutely worth it, but it's a long process.
But it wasn't back then, right?
No, it wasn't. But they didn't know then how important it would be like for court now. I mean, just think about like now you can throw out court cases or a whole conviction based on one little tiny thing.
Yeah.
So that's why they're so careful now with that kind of stuff.
So I have a couple of questions, but I think the biggest thing is, what was the biggest interest in the Green River Killer for you? Like, what did you find to be either the most odd or the most interesting thing about him? Because you got to study some people, and we're going to talk about it later because you talked about Gacy and you told me something that he did that I had no idea, that you said the public wouldn't necessarily know. So that's something we should have talked about maybe, but we'll talk about it later. Yeah. But what did you find the most interesting about this guy? Because he was I mean, I think for me, the most interesting is that he has been able to get away with it for so long and he has very little notoriety. Like, I haven't seen a Netflix special on him, and we're talking about somebody who's a bad dude.
That is a really good point. To be what you quoted earlier, like the second.
Yeah, he's the second, like, most prolific serial killer in American history.
Which it wasn't even that he had to like be that smart to do something like this.
No, he wasn't that smart.
I think that's what makes me the most angry, and that it is, I think there was a lot of stuff that could have been done better by certain agencies, which at the time you don't think when you start an investigation like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a 80 body or 50 body count serial killer, right? No one goes into an investigation that way.
No, but let's go back to no rest for the wicked. What if that was, right? Like you said originally when sorry guys, spoiler alert, but you said when the sheriff's department took the gun out of the kid's hand and then you guys found a different bullet, right? Like that could have easily started an investigation for, let's just say, a serial killer, right? Like you guys don't know what's going on. So something as easy as that, as a simple mistake in the very beginning, could have caused a different outcome.
Well, that's why we treat every suicide like a homicide. And that's, like trust your gut cases, right? You don't go into it with any perception of what the case is actually going to be. You always go into it with an open mind, and you have to think, and it's looking at it from an overall, like what I call like a macro lens. It's not looking at it in micro lens of just the body itself. And that's what's cool about being a death investigator, is that you don't just see the body in the investigation, you look at the overall totality of the entire scene. So it's working from the outside in and trying to see, does this body fit this scene in the way that it is? I have this really cool book. It's called The Nutshell Cases. And this woman, I can't remember when she made this, but it almost looked like a dollhouse. And she recreated all of these scenes, and they're like in little dollhouse settings, but it's like, so you can see it in like a bird's eye view. So if you didn't look at something from a certain perspective, it might give you a totally different scenario.
That's so smart.
Yeah, it's really cool. Actually, I caught it when I went to the Harvard bookstore. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But it's like, if everyone looked at things from that point of view, you might look at a scene in a totally different light. And so looking at this case now, okay, what if they would have had drones then? And they would have actually known to look at these cases, like at these drop points, and like, okay, well, now what they do is like, let's look at how many sexual predators we have in this area or whatever, They handle these cases so different now.
Also, like they would have looked at, okay, so let's look at the stoplights around this area, right? Like, let's look at footage of this. Let's look at everybody has Ring cameras. Everybody has, they could back it up almost all the way. Maybe, well, no, because he did it when there was no technology. But, had he done it, I'm assuming now, that's exactly what they would do. They would go back and figure it out. This is why any of you people who are little mini murderers, I'm just kidding. Hopefully you're not listening to this and we're giving you ideas. But like, seriously, go back. You can trace everything now. So the fact that like anybody does anything, you're dumb.
I don't know. I mean, you asked me like what made me think of this case. I don't even know. What were we even talking about? Where I even brought this up? I don't know.
We were talking about your profiling class, and like you just spent a lot of time on him.
Yeah, I particularly remember this case because he was dumb enough to keep going back and visiting the bodies. But it's like, okay, if you're finding multiple bodies in the same place and this person, I would think I would have someone posted there all the time. Maybe not someone who's a dodo brain.
Maybe they are.
Oh my gosh. Magically, a body appeared while I was on my smoke break. Like, come on, let's get this together. I think I was just like, this guy was not a mastermind. Like, it wasn't like Sherlock Holmes needed to be brought in to solve this. I think I get really frustrated dealing with dumb people. And I feel like this guy was not smart. So I'm like, I think this case frustrated me. Because I'm like, all these women didn't have to die for this guy to be found.
Well, also, I feel like for me, I think the other thing I found most interesting, he was a family man. Like you can even read about his son going like, oh, I was in the car.
Anyone can be a father, Kelly. Anyone can father a child.
That's true. But the son said my dad never missed like a baseball game. He was always there as far as I remember.
That is his way of covering up.
Living a normal life.
You can manipulate. You can manipulate all you want. It doesn't mean that you're a good dad.
He didn't say he was a bad dad. I just think that he was shocked when they started telling him like, hey, your dad's being questioned as the Green River Killer.
They asked those women that he was married to and engaged to. And you know what? They all had very similar stories and interactions.
What were those stories?
I told you all their
between
things with proclivities with him. Like there's a reason why he was married 3 different times and engaged.
I didn't know if there was anything else that maybe they said about him.
Well, I only got so far into it. I'm like, bleh, gross. So I've read enough.
So only a couple of questions. I'm really disappointed in you guys. I thought you would ask more questions and maybe I missed questions somewhere, but no one really asked anything. Someone did ask if we would ever get in a car with them. And it's like, come on, we're smarter than that.
You want to face my Glock and my mace? I also have a 120-pound dog, so...
That would be a no.
You gotta be dodging bullets, homie. I'm also strong.
I work out.
Girls these days can handle... Unless he's got some, which I know so many girls have this complex now of like, I can take on, which men do have a completely different strength. Okay. Like I completely understand that, but like there's a reason why I carry. So
sometimes it's not about the strength. It's about the heart. Because you do see some of those girls get away. So we don't know. Maybe he had girls get away.
There was defensive. Well, yeah, there was one. She was young. The runaway girl. Or no. The waitress, she was walking home. It was a waitress. She was walking home and I think she did make it, but it is like, they do have defensive wounds. You can see defensive wounds.
Yeah, because he doesn't look like a very big guy. So maybe for him, it was hard too, but.
I think a lot of it is just catching someone off guard. I mean, it takes 7 pounds of pressure to cut off an airway and then lose pressure. I mean, and then I know that he did tie up. So what if some of these women that did fight hard, he was able to actually get them to pass out to a certain extent and then tie them up within that time. And then I know that you mentioned like I guess it would technically be like mutilation, like putting things into body cavities.
That was my second question because he did put stuff. They found stuff in body cavities.
Yeah. So maybe the ones that fought back hard against him, maybe he was like, that was an extra like thing of defiance against them or extra disrespect to them of like, this is how much you mean to me, like you're trash. I think he put like meat on them. And I think that was like, you're just like a piece of meat kind of thing. Like,
do you think that was because he wanted the wildlife to also eat them?
I mean, maybe, but he didn't do that to all of them.
No. And so that was the same thing my understanding is with the stones, were they carved stones or just stones he picked up and then he put them in their vaginal cavities, right?
Yeah, I think that's just a complete sign of just disrespect. He didn't respect women at all. And yeah, with animal activity, if you're just dumping them out somewhere in like an open place, so you call it scavengers. So that can be, of course, in Seattle, that area, you're going to have
all kinds of stuff.
I'm sure vultures, coyotes, and it depends on how big the body part is. They can be carried off for miles. I had a friend that she did this really cool thesis with pigs and we dumped them out by a lake and we went out after a certain amount of time and we measured. They put trackers in the bones and we hunted down how far away the scavengers out there dragged the bones. Mm-hmm.
How far?
Some of them were miles and they would drag them back to their dens. So like coyotes, they were big pigs. So some of the pieces were bigger, but parts like skulls, you're not going to be able to carry those off. But like the mandible of the jaw, smaller pieces like ribs and stuff, like those can travel really far. Larger things like femurs and stuff, like those aren't going to get as far. They'll probably eat them more on site of the dumping.
So I know we didn't talk a lot of detail about the Green River Killer. It's more like the things that you would find or the things that happen on the scene. If you do want to go get some in-length information about the Green River Killer, I would just recommend one of the podcasts. I don't know if Morbid's covered it yet, but I'm sure there's a lot of true crime.
Well, there's books out there. There's stuff you can find on the internet, but this is just things that I would say from my perspective. I mean, there's pictures online of the bodies being dragged out of the water. I mean, like we've talked about in the past, these are things that it's not necessarily a good thing to find a body in water. You know, I've had bodies, like I said, in rivers, and they're very difficult to pull. And especially during that amount of time, who knows how far down from, I don't remember exactly how far down the river these bodies have traveled. But like you said, you know, how many things like have those bodies like hit along the way? Yeah, it's going to be a lot harder to do an autopsy on a body like that. You're having to document so many little tiny things on those bodies. And if that body ever washes up, all those little open wounds, you're going to have little critters. They're going to be like, yum.
Yeah. Well, so thank you for the treat. Happy Halloween, everyone. And we'll be back next week with, I'm sure, something special that Amy has lined up.
I don't know, Thanksgiving. I'm trying to think. I do have some foodie kind of ones.
Until next time, Thanks, guys.
Thanks.